The Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the first and second inaugural addresses of Thomas Jefferson are my four favorite documents. Emancipation Proclamation, subsequent, and following that, Gettysburg Address, which was essentially a restatement of the Constitution and the Declaration. But coming into this century and broadening it, I would just give you one that you're going to find surprising. And that was the Helsinki Final Act, 1975, which was the Declaration of the Rights of Man. And it was as a result of one of these international negotiations. And President Ford, in one of the more historic acts of this century, but one of the more underappreciated acts of this century, going against domestic political opposition, signed the Helsinki Final Act, which essentially said there are universal rights of men and women. And in order to get the Soviets to also sign that, we had to make some accommodations with respect to we shouldn't change borders. Some people said, aha, you're validating Soviet occupation of the Eastern European countries. Well, they were there, and we didn't validate them. We still argued against it. But I believe that getting the Soviets to agree to that was a poison pill that they took that helped bring about the end of the Cold War and the demise of this evil empire. Acknowledging that men and women, no matter where they are, no matter what government they are under, have certain universal rights. And so I have to go back to the Declaration, because that's where we got it from. All men are created equal and endowed by the Creator by certain inalienable rights. We sometimes forget the sentence that comes after that, or the phrase that comes after that. Governments are instituted among men to secure these rights. And that could set me off on a discussion of affirmative action and other things, as well as what happened after the Helsinki Final Act. But the role of government is to secure the universal rights of men and women. The Declaration and the Constitution, which I consider just absolutely marvelous, profound documents, they didn't apply to people who were black. And that's the truth. In fact, the Constitution was used as a means of suppressing blacks. In the Dred Scott decision, the Supreme Court said that a human being can be property if they're black, and only if they're black. You can't be property if you're white. If you're black, you can be property and returned to an owner. And that was done by the Supreme Court as a matter of constitutional law, based it on the Constitution. Plessy versus Ferguson in the 1890s, 1893, I guess, or 1896, rather, I think, essentially said that separate is equal. And the separation is on the basis of color, solely color. And that therefore, as long as you treat equally, then you can separate them. But the whole reason to separate them was to treat unequally. And it essentially validated Jim Crow, segregation, disenfranchisement of an entire group of people who were black, giving them no economic opportunity, don't educate them, continue to treat them as 10th class citizens, and it rested on a decision of the Supreme Court of the United States, which was founded on the Constitution. And that continued up to my lifetime. So in 1963, when I came home from Vietnam, having served my nation, having sworn an oath to the Constitution to serve my nation, I came home and was denied access to restaurants and refused service in hotels and motels that if my skin was white, or if I could shine it up a little more than it is and put a hat on my head so my hair isn't showing, as long as I could prove I wasn't black, then I was free to enjoy these benefits. The fact that I was a soldier of the nation was irrelevant. And this all rested on the Constitution, according to the courts, and according to some 30-odd presidents, and according to some 180 Congresses. And so this is an ancient history to me. This is my lifetime, my generation. And I choose not to forget that we have this history. But no one loves the Declaration or the Constitution more than me. But you have to see it in its correct perspective. And because it was so misused over those years, and it took us 200 years to get into the spirit that was intended by the Founding Fathers, even though they knew they couldn't do it in practice at that time, even though it took us 200 years, we can't ignore the legacy of that history that is still contaminating the present. And I think tools such as affirmative action are useful to help us rub out, sand down this inequity that continues to haunt the present that came from the past. So some say we don't wallow around in old history. Why not? We wallow around in the beauty of the Constitution and the Declaration. That's our old history. Well, then let's wallow around in all of it. What it did to black people for all those years. And therefore, I think it is appropriate to use tools such as affirmative action and other similar tools. I consider all of these to be transitional tools and temporary tools, but they're still necessary. If anyone says, well, they're not necessary, well, then let's go visit some inner cities and look at 100% segregated schools in 1998. And they're segregated by race and class and race are all mixed up. And we've got to get every one of these children educated into a college. Those who are able to go to college and want to go to college and can qualify for college. This isn't for people who are not qualified. But give them an extra added advantage to get into universities, get them into the middle class, and break that cycle in that family for that child forever. And that's what will speed things up. I was told the same thing in 1963 and 4. We didn't need a civil rights law. What's wrong? Personal property. They want to serve blacks in a restaurant, a public highway. So what? So what? Put some shoe polish in your face, see how you think about it. So, wonderful country. It's unthinkable for me to be chairman when I came in the Army 40 years ago this month, next month. It would have been unthinkable for anyone to say, well, he's going to be chairman. Come on. But it happened. And so what will happen in one more generation? Maybe we'll get rid of all of these residual problems. But we're not going to get rid of them by just ignoring them or saying, oh, gee, just do better. Or it's your fault. We have to do better, and to some extent we have to make sure our children don't ignore what their forefathers did to get us to this point. So excellence and performance and high standards are important. But I think it's also appropriate to use tools such as affirmative action to make sure all doors are open. It was more disappointing than terrifying. Fort Benning is a large Army installation in Georgia, in Columbus, Georgia. And in those days, the 50s and well into the early 60s, until the Civil Rights Acts of 1964 was passed and the Voting Rights Act of 65, it was in the heart of the segregated South. And so on base, it was wonderful. You could go anywhere, live anywhere, do anything you wish to do. But as soon as you went over the hill and down into Columbus, Georgia, it was a totally segregated existence. And the story I've told many times is coming home from Vietnam in 1963, having been away for an entire year, and in the process my wife having had a son while I was away, and I was busy trying to get a home ready for my family in the area. I couldn't get on base yet. The housing wasn't available. So I found a place in Phoenix City, Alabama, which also was not a great place to live as a black in those days. And one night after working on the house, I tried to buy a hamburger at a drive-in place in Columbus. I knew I couldn't go in. I didn't try to go in. I just tried to order it on the little speaker box for it to be brought out. And the young lady came out to take my order, the way it was done in those days, and she looked in the car and she asked me if I was Puerto Rican, and I said no. And then she asked me if I was an African student studying at the infantry school. I said, no, I'm not an African student studying at the infantry school. I'm an American. And she said, I'm terribly sorry, but I can't bring it out to the car. You'll have to get out and go around to the back. And I said, thank you very much, no thanks, and I drove off. That wasn't terrifying. It was just deeply, deeply hurtful and disappointing. If anything, it encouraged me, motivated me, caused me to find ways to demonstrate to people who held such beliefs that their beliefs had to be incorrect, had to be a lie. There's a great story from the Civil War where a Confederate general was writing to the Confederate government in Richmond.
And it has to do with the issue of allowing blacks to serve in the Confederate Army, or conscripting them for the Confederate Army. And this Confederate general writes to Jefferson Davis, and he says, don't let this happen. Whatever you do, don't let this happen. Because if blacks can wear a uniform with brass buttons and a belt with a brass buckle, and if they can go and serve and lay down their lives, they are the equal to us. And if that is the case, the whole theory of the Confederacy is a lie. So whatever you do, don't let black men serve. And the history of the black experience in the United States military for 300 years is a repetition of that. Black men were always willing to serve, as were black women, in the hope that their service as equals, willing to lay down their lives and fight for what the country believed in, would transfer over into civilian life. They were disappointed for most of our history, but with each conflict, things got a little bit better until we finally reached the period where a black man or black woman can rise to the top. And so the answer to your question is yes, it motivated me to fight back and to prove that if I'm your equal in performance, then segregation has to be a lie.
When I got orders to Vietnam in the summer of 1962, I was excited and very happy. I'd been selected by my government to go to a combat zone and to serve a purpose that was noble. And we were fighting communism, and we were going to try to help the South Vietnamese protect themselves from communism and defend their way of life, let them make their own choices as to how they should be governed. And so it was a very noble undertaking, and it was wrapped in the mystique of the Kennedy era. And I was one of the first group of advisors, actually the second group of advisors to go in, about 15,000 of us at that time. And so for a young 25-year-old infantry captain, this was it. This was the thing to do. And so I went and did my job, and I did it for a year. And I came back after a year to rejoin a family that I really didn't know, a son I'd never seen, who was born while I was gone, and a wife who I'd known for 9 months and been away from for a year. And going back to that, but also going back with a little bit of concern about Vietnam, because I couldn't see that we'd made much progress in the year I was there, tromping through the jungles. And the enemy seemed to have the initiative and the advantage. And so I came back thinking this is a very big problem, and it's going to take a lot more than what we're doing. And it's not clear that the South Vietnamese are really up to the task or really represent the kind of government that we should be that anxious to defend. They had a lot of work to do to prove themselves to their own people and to prove themselves worthy of the kind of support that we were increasingly giving them. When I went back some 5 years later, a lot had changed. It was now an American war with the South Vietnamese, who fought gallantly. The young soldiers I served with, Vietnamese soldiers. But it was now an American war, and we were bringing all of American technology to bear. And I was now a major, not a captain, a little more senior. I'd also seen some terrible things happen in my own country in that 5-year period. Assassination of President Kennedy, the death of Martin Luther King, riots, church bombings, the civil rights revolution. And 1968 was a terrible time in this country. A president who said he wasn't going to run again, and the war had turned sour. And when I got back and spent another year there, we were applying American firepower and technology, but it wasn't clear that we had moved any further along in recapturing the initiative or persuading the North Vietnamese. By now, they were no longer insurgent South Vietnamese communists, but persuading the North Vietnamese that this is not a course they should pursue. They were determined to pursue it to the end, and they would spend whatever number of lives it took to win. And it was a war they'd been fighting for 40 years. They understood what they were about, and they were prepared to make the supreme sacrifice. We no longer clearly understood what we were about, and we were losing hundreds of young men a week, but it was not clear that we were in it to prevail or we could prevail. In one of the sad chapters of American history, having promised the South Vietnamese that we would come to their assistance with more weapons and ammunition if they needed it, the United States Congress finally abandoned them. That went against our word. Whether they would have prevailed even if we hadn't abandoned them is, I think, questionable. I think they would probably have lost anyway, but I wish they had not lost on the heels of an American abandonment. So it was a very dismal period, and when it was all over, I was still a professional soldier, now a lieutenant colonel, and we were in an army that had been seen as the loser in this war. We were shaken to our core. We had lost a generation of leaders. We had the scandal of My Lai. We had racial relations. The American people said, we want out of the draft. We no longer want to have a draft. In fact, they were separating themselves from the Army. You just go out and recruit, and that's what you get, but no more draft. So we ended the draft. There was an estrangement between the American people and its military. But I was a professional soldier, and so it was my job to work in that world and try to fix it, repair it. And one of the things I'm proudest of in my life is that over the next 15, 17 years working with great leaders, and finally with new political leadership that came in with the Reagan administration, political leaders who told us to be proud of ourselves once again and gave us the resources to really finish the transition to a modern, powerful army. We became a force that the nation once again was proud of, and we saw the results of that in Desert Storm.
One of my little rules is you get all the facts you can. You get all of the analysis you can. You grind it up in your mental computer, and then when you have all the facts available to you, go with your instinct. I go with my instinct a great deal, but it is not just a snap go. You have to learn the technique of informing your instinct, of educating that little place down in your stomach where instinct resides, so that it is not blind instinct, but informed instinct. But built into each of us is a little calculator that can make judgments that will never appear on a piece of paper. And sometimes you just know something's right. You can't prove it to anybody, or you know something's wrong. Little ethical circuit breakers you carry around inside of you, or little right and wrong circuit breakers you carry around inside of you. So I go with my instinct a great deal.
Well, we just dealt with it. We just said we will not allow ourselves to be broken. We will not allow ourselves to be abandoned by the people. We will demonstrate our worthiness. We will go back to our traditions. We will go back to our history. We'll gain inspiration from our past, and we will reshape ourselves for a new future. And we sort of got rid of some of the touchy-feely things that we were experimenting with, and we went back to discipline, structure. You are serving the nation, even though sometimes the nation doesn't appreciate it. That's all right. They will when the next conflict comes along. And we just went back to basics: structure, discipline, patriotism, pride. Develop the best equipment in the world, show our troops that if they go into battle, they'll be taken care of, and their leaders won't abandon them. And a whole generation of senior officers came up, including me, General Schwarzkopf and many others, who, having gone through Vietnam, were committed to the proposition that if we ever have to face something like that again, as the senior officers, it is our responsibility to work with our political leaders and necessary push our political leaders to make sure that they understand what they're getting into and have they made the right political decisions. And they're the ones to determine, what the right political decisions are. But we felt it was our responsibility to lay out the consequences of the use of military force. And I think that all that came together in the Bush administration, the Reagan and Bush administration, especially in the Bush administration. When we faced conflicts in Panama and in Desert Storm and the Gulf War, where President Bush and his political leaders, working with him, Secretary Baker, Jim Baker, and Secretary Dick Cheney, came up with clear political guidance and then supervised us very carefully. It wasn't just, okay, here's the guidance, you military folks, just tell us what you need and you get it. We had to explain to our political leaders and justify our political leaders what we needed and why we were going to do things the way we recommended to them. And they challenged us, made sure that they were satisfied that we had thought it all through, and then they let us do the job. They turned us loose. That was quite a renaissance. and the American people when we came back from Desert Storm, really beginning after Panama. In Panama, they saw a professional army at work again, and it was a short conflict. It was an invasion. We restored a democratically elected president and got rid of a tyrant. And they said, hey, look at that. That's pretty good. And then I guess it's a year and a half later, we did Desert Storm. And they saw it again, and there was a great outpouring of support. The people were surprised, frankly. I was a young infantry captain, as I mentioned, and I was going through the jungle with my Vietnamese battalion. Just myself, one other American, and 400 Vietnamese soldiers, and we essentially lived in the jungle. And we were heading to a special forces camp, an American special forces camp one day to come out for a little while. And I don't know, I just stepped off the side of the trail, and the Viet Cong, communist enemy, would put these traps, nothing more than a hole in the ground, a couple of feet deep, with spikes, bamboo cut spikes, and planted them, just like out of a Tarzan movie. And they would cover the spikes with a little bit of buffalo dung, making sure they were quite infectious, and then just put something over it to cover its presence. And usually we knew how to spot these, but that day I just didn't, and stepped into it, went down. My right foot went down into it, and one of the spikes caught the edge of my foot. The sole of my boot missed it, and it caught the instep, went all the way through, and of course I felt it rather immediately and jerked my foot out, which pulled it right back out. And so I didn't realize how injured I was. I just knew that I'd punctured my foot. But it was so quick, I didn't realize how serious it was, so I didn't really say anything. And we just kept marching toward the Special Forces camp. And in about 15 minutes, I realized that I had done something real bad. And then in about 30 minutes, I was having difficulty walking and had to use a stick. Fortunately, we were close to the camp, and I was able to get there. And then the Special Forces medics cut my boot off, and they could see my foot was purple by then, and the spike had gone all the way through from the bottom to the top and then come right back out, totally infecting the wound as it made the wound. And so they got me out of there, and I went to division headquarters, and there was a doctor there. It wasn't anything required any put him under anesthesia. Let's cut him open. They simply used a rather straightforward method of disinfectant. They put a cloth through the bottom of my foot, used a probe to push it through the top, put antibiotics over it, and kind of like a shoe shine rag, cleaned it out, which was not a terribly pleasant experience. And then when they had a clean section in there, they just cut off both sides and left it in there for about a week to fight the infection. And a week later, I was pretty much okay. Well, there were a number crashing in a helicopter and getting all wrapped around trees in the jungle in a helicopter is certainly memorable. I was the operations officer of an infantry division, the Americal Division, and one day we were out with the commanding general and the chief of staff going to visit a unit that had just discovered a North Vietnamese arms cache. And it was way in the deep triple canopy jungle near the Laotian border. And the only way to get into the site was to essentially fly over the canopy and look for the opening that had been cut by the troops who were in the jungle. And they cut an opening just big enough for a helicopter to literally come down through the opening like an elevator. And so we were hovering over this opening as the pilot, examined it and checked it, and then he started his descent. But I'm afraid he was the commanding general's pilot, and he hadn't been into places like this as often as some of the other pilots, who might have been less experienced, but they had more experience in going up and down in this canopy. But for whatever reason, as he started down, he lost a little bit of control, and the helicopter shifted to the right, and then it shifted to the left. And to this day, sitting in the left-hand seat in the rear, I could see the blade hit the tree and suddenly go from moving very rapidly, which is what keeps you in the air, to stopping instantly, which converts you from a helicopter into a falling object, more like a rock. And so we fell about 100 feet or so and hit hard, stumps all over the place, and the helicopter started breaking apart, engine coming down through the passenger compartment, engine still turning, blades, broken blades spinning, cockpit area crashed or smashed up, and the danger of a fire. And so I knew I was hurt, but not too badly, so I unbuckled, ran out, looked back and saw that the general was still inside, went in and helped him out, helped some others out, and then started to smoke, but it wasn't burning. And then I and another young soldier went back, and I thought the pilot was seriously injured. His back was. General's aide was in the middle of the passenger compartment, and the whole engine had come down through the passenger compartment and smashed his head into the radio console. I thought he was dead because he had an engine on his head. But when I went back in to start pulling the body out, it was clear that I heard a noise and a slight movement, so he was alive. And his helmet essentially had been smashed, but it protected him enough from fatal injury. So we got him out, and he was walking around about 2 days later. So that's memorable. You don't forget that too often. I broke my ankle and some other things, but they were minor.
It's something of an embarrassing question for me because I try to reflect back 40, 45 years to those days. I'm not sure I had very clear goals, and they certainly weren't any long-range goals. I was a kid playing in the street. I wanted to grow up and be healthy. I wanted to excel at whatever I did. I wasn't a great student. I hoped I was learning enough in school to make me successful in whatever life held for me. And even when I got into college, it wasn't clear what I was doing in college. College was something that was expected in my family you would go to. I suspect if it hadn't been for my family influence and pressure of my parents, the expectation of my parents that I would go to college, I probably wouldn't have gone. But there was that expectation. My sister had gone, the relatives had gone. And so that got me into college.
I have one sister, 5.5 years older, the sort of star of the family. I was kind of the runt, the kid who was worried about a lot. Marilyn was always the good one, and she did well in school and I didn't, and there was no doubt about where she was going to go to college, and after college she'd be successful as a teacher. I was always a question mark in the family. But she subsequently went into teaching, had a wonderful 40-year career as a teacher.
My parents were Jamaican immigrants. They came from the island of Jamaica in the Caribbean. They came to the United States in the early 1920s, came separately, didn't know each other there. They came to improve their lot. The economic situation in Jamaica at that time caused a lot of people to come to the United States looking for a better life. They met. They fell in love, were married, and then they had 2 children. My sister Marilyn, and of course me. They were very important in our lives, my sister's life and in my life, for the love they gave us, for the structure they provided, and just for the inspiration that they gave to us in the way they lived their life. I've told many audiences, both parents and young people, but mostly parents, children don't listen to what you tell them. They don't listen to the lectures. Well, they listen patiently. But what they really respond to, what they really do is watch how you live your life, watch how you exercise your values. And if they see worth in that, if they see merit in the way you are living your life, that's what will influence children. And I saw great merit in the way my parents lived their life. And I never wished to displease them. I always wanted them to be proud of me. The worst days of my life were not when I got a spanking, but when I did something that disappointed my mother and my father. I was not a terribly good student. I did not read a great deal when I was a youngster. The streets were of greater attraction to me in New York than was the New York public library system, or staying in my room reading anything but comic books. I read that which I was required to read by the public school system of the city of New York, my Antonia and children's books, but I didn't really become an avid reader until, frankly, I was an adult. I initially saw reading as something one had to do, But it was only when I became an adult that I realized what a joy there was in reading, in learning, and what knowledge existed in books and magazines and newspapers. And now I'm always reading, constantly reading. The old Tiffany Theater. Tiffany Theater was one of those inner city theaters that every inner city neighborhood had in those days, every few blocks apart. And it was the place we all went to on Saturdays. I don't even know if it was open during the rest of the week, but on Saturday it was open for all of us kids. And with your grubby little hand clutching a dirty quarter, and with whatever food was necessary to last you for the rest of the day, went to the Tiffany and watched cowboy movie after cowboy movie, and threw things at each other and generally misbehaved, I expect. It was only once I was in college, about 6 months into college, I found something that I liked, and that was ROTC, Reserve Officer Training Corps in the military. And I not only liked it, but I was pretty good at it. And that's what you really have to look for in life, something that you like and something that you think you're pretty good at. And if you can put those two things together, then you're on the right track, and just drive on. And once you got something you like, something you're good at, and then do it for all it's worth. Be the very best you can be. Let nothing deter you. Let nothing stand in your way, and go for it. Perhaps the structure, perhaps the discipline, the sense of camaraderie among a group of young men who were similarly motivated. Maybe it was just the uniform. Who knows? I was only a little over 17 years old at the time. I also grew up during a period of war. World War II occupied the good part of the first several years of my life, and then as I entered my teenage years, the Korean War came along. So by the time I was 17 years old, I'd seen about 7 or 8 years of war. And as any young child would, I studied the tanks and the planes and the guns, and there was a fascination with all that. And I suspect that also moved me in the direction. But I think it was the structure, the discipline, the sense of camaraderie, sense of adventure associated with being in the military. My father died a year before I made brigadier general, so he saw me rise to the rank of colonel. My mother was at my promotion ceremony to brigadier general, and she was enormously pleased. And then she died in 1984, before all the excitement of the last few years came about. I talk about family a great deal. There's nothing like going out to a military unit, whether it's Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, and seeing young men and women, usually in their late teens or early 20s, working together. And the closer they are to danger, the more closely they work together, and the more they become a family, because they recognize that, hey, if my life depends on you, all I care about is your ability to perform and your willingness to sacrifice for me. And when you finally get up into the front lines, or into the cockpits of our fighter planes, and somebody's flying wing for somebody else, that's all that counts. I don't care what color you are. I don't care where your parents come from. Can you perform? And I will take care of you, you will take care of me, we will sacrifice one another. That's what keeps a military unit bonded together. It isn't discipline. Discipline isn't what causes men to go into the face of enemy fire. It's counting on one another, and serving one another, and loving one another as family members. And we saw that again in Desert Storm. It was a real hit for the nation to see these young folks out in the desert. They're not supposed to be like this. They're supposed to be druggies. They're supposed to be troublesome. They're supposed to be violence prone. They're supposed to be uneducable. And here they were in the desert, smart as tacks, patriotic, clean, drug-free, working together in teams as family members. And so I'm so proud of that I say to many audiences, we got to capture that somehow. I know that the inner city of Los Angeles and New York is not an infantry battalion, but somehow the lessons of an infantry battalion have to be brought back to the nation. It is a very powerful faith, and it just comes from many, many years of watching this country deal with problems watching this country go through crisis after crisis, and always being amazed at the resilience that comes out of the heartland of the country, of the people of the United States. And I'm always of the view that no matter what crisis we are going through, whether it's a political crisis or an economic crisis, in due course, either through an election or through some other manifestation, the American people make their will known. And that will is almost universally a will based on what's right, based on honesty, based on goodness. And so I am as corny as you can be on that subject, but it is the deepest element of my national faith. I have to be willing to work very hard. It is not a soft life. It's a difficult life. It's a life of sacrifice. It's a life of service. That's why we call it service. So you have to be ready for that. You have to be prepared to subject yourself to discipline and a certain structure, unlike anything in civilian life. Make sure you're ready for that. You've got to like it. You simply have to love being a soldier, a sailor, an airman, a Marine. And if you're not sure, go ahead and try it for a while. You can get out. It's a volunteer organization. You can get out. And many young people do get out. In fact, most of them do get out. And the surprising thing is that as they get close to getting out, when they know they're getting out, they start counting the days down. Oh, I'm out of here, I'm out of here, I'm out of here. But then they get out, 6 months or a year later, they remember with great fondness their military experience, most of them. One of the nicest part of my jobs is hearing from veterans of the Korean War and Vietnam War and World War II, occasionally even an old World War I veteran. And they always tell me about their outfit and their general, or I was with Patton. They have very powerful memories and pleasant memories of their experience in the military. So I encourage people, if you're not sure what you want to do and you're interested in things military, go try it for a few years. It'll grow you up. And then you can stay or you can get on with a new phase of your life. But you'll be ready for that new phase of your life in a better way, I think, if you've had the military experience. Lots of people in Congress right now and elsewhere are coming to us saying, you've got to do something. You've got to get all these kids off the street, take them into the Army, open CCC camps, do this and do that in order to give young people the structure, the sense of service so they can go on and be good citizens in other fields and endeavors. To some extent, I'm also a great constitutionalist. I believe that the military exists to protect the nation against enemies, foreign and domestic, to fight wars and not to be a social service agency. And I'm a little concerned that there are those who, having failed to deal with the problem in our communities by community leadership, are going to try to put the problem squarely in the backs of the military. And I'm not sure that's the proper role for military in a democratic society. The team means up, down, and sideways. I'm a great believer in loyalty to the person I work for. If you take the king's shilling, you do the king's work. And so loyalty upward is a very important trait for me. Loyalty downward to those who are doing it for you. And loyalty to the people you're working side by side with. I don't view luck as being a completely random event. Luck tends to come to people who are prepared. You're lucky you got the job. No, you're not. You are lucky that somebody knew how good you were. You were lucky that somebody became aware of the talent you offered to the position. That's the luck. The luck isn't you got it because you were unprepared or unqualified. So luck has played an important role in my life over the years, but luck won't do it by itself.
Washington is a battlefield in and all its own. Yeah, I mean, as you become more senior in the military, you really do have to have an understanding to be successful. You have to have an understanding of how the political process works and how to deal with public relations and how to convey the story of the armed forces to the American people. And the political process and the media are two things you really do have to master. And not because you want to be a spinmeister, but because the political process is how the country runs. That's how democracies run. So you have to know how to go up and testify on Capitol Hill and satisfy members of the House and Senate as to how you're planning to spend the money, which the Constitution gives them the authority to appropriate every year. So you got to do it every year, whether you like it or not. And you have to expect to be punched around a little bit, challenged. You have to expect people who want to spend less money than you want. And you have to expect to hear parochial constituent interests from individual congressmen, because that's why they were elected, to represent parochial constituent interests. That's all part of the process. And you have to understand that the media is out to find anything about you that you don't want them to know. That's their role in a democracy. They are the fourth estate. And your responsibility is to tell the American people as much as you can about what you're doing with their sons and daughters and their money. But you're also supposed to protect their sons and daughters. And so there may be things you don't want to tell the media. And so there's this great contest that takes place, but it's a healthy contest. And any senior general or admiral who doesn't understand that you have to do this, then isn't going to be very successful. You can't just rant and rave at the political process or be mad because the Washington Post or the New York Times said something unpleasant about you that day. You just got to keep doing your job to the best of your ability. And so to some extent, it's war in a different way. But politics is war without bullets and shells, usually.
First and foremost for young people is to commit themselves to something and to realize there is an alternative to going down the negative path. You don't have to do drugs. I don't care what your friends are doing. I don't care what your older brother might have done. I don't care where you came from. I don't care about the fact you had a broken family or this was wrong in your life or that was wrong in your life. I don't care about any of that. You are a human being with a brain and a conscience of your own. You know what's right or wrong. And you have to do the best you can with what you have. So don't let any of these elements in your background, any of these negative elements in your background be an excuse. You can climb out of it. Other people have climbed out of it. And therefore commit yourself to climbing out of it. Set a goal for yourself. Don't make it, I'm going to be a general or I'm going to be the President of the United States. I'm going to finish school. I'm going to get through this week without doing drugs. I don't care what my buddy down the street tries to make me do. It isn't going to happen. I am not going to get involved in violence. I am not going to allow peer pressure to force me to do something that those little fuses in my stomach tell me I should not be doing. We do need to help them. It isn't just a matter of you're on your own, young man, young lady. We need to give young people structure in their lives, discipline, give them a life space, put boundaries on them. And those boundaries hopefully will come from parents or at least one parent if both parents are not there. They also have to come from school, they have to come from churches, they have to come from the community in general. There can be no organized behavior, there can be no progress without structure to the environment. And anyone who has raised a child knows that, at least I would hope they know, worked for my kids and we're working on a grandson now. But as they start to get about, they want to know where the boundaries are. They want to know when they run into a wall and set the four walls up, and they will be a joy for everybody inside those four walls. When they don't know where the walls are and they're constantly testing, you've got a problem, you've got an out-of-control situation. And I think that applies not only to infants, but to all young people until that point in their life where they can set their own walls up.
I've also started to dedicate large parts of my time, and really it has become what I do and my goal in life, to working on the problems of America's young people. Not all of them, most of them are doing just fine. But we have millions of them who are not going to be invited to the American Academy of Achievement. We've got millions of them who wonder if they'll ever survive past the age of 18 without having a bullet put in their back. I've been to places in America, in one city in particular, where a teacher was telling me that the the children come back on Monday morning weighing less than they did when they went home on Friday afternoon. You don't get proper nutrition. There's nobody really taking care of them. And so there's a hole in their life for 2 days till they come back to school and start eating again. And that's America. There are a lot of children in need, so I've started to work on that with United Negro College Fund and Boys and Girls Clubs of America. I'm on the boards of those and a number of others. But the principal activity is through the chairmanship of America's Promise, the Alliance for Youth, where we're making promises to young people. We're creating alliances between the government, the private sector, the public sector, to bring more resources in the lives of these children who are sometimes without hope, more mentors, safer places for them to learn and grow, give them all a healthy start in life with vaccinations and proper nutrition and education against drugs and cigarettes. A marketable skill for our youngsters as the economy goes upscale and the skill level goes upscale as a result of the information and technology revolutions. And finally, we're also trying to persuade youngsters to serve their community and to begin that service as early as possible, put service to others into their heart as a virtue. So America's Promise is taking most of my time. We got the symbol of this little red wagon that you see here, which we picked as a perfect symbol of a nostalgic childhood. Every boy and girl ought to have a little red wagon. Every boy and girl, a little red wagon that you can pull along a kid brother, a kid sister, a heavy load, a dream. A little red wagon that one day could be a rocket ship or another day could be an ocean liner. But it's there to help you make your way through life, and it comes with a nice long black handle so that an adult can reach down, grab it, and help you. And so that's the symbol of America's Promise, and I'm trying to make sure that every child in America has a little red wagon. We can't just sit around waiting for government to solve some of these intractable social problems that we've had for years. Government has a role to play. It is time for all of us to live up more fully to the concept of citizenship. And for those of us who, as citizens of this nation, have been blessed with treasure and wealth and good position and comfortable homes and all the blessings of this land, to be a good citizen, to be a big citizen, requires you to do more in the way of sharing with those who are in need. So that a family that has 3 wonderful children ought to try to see if they could find 3 hours a week to share that life with a kid in need who doesn't have a mentor, who doesn't get to play in Little League, do the other things that we take for granted. Somebody in that family who might go tutor at a school on an afternoon off from a job, and we're encouraging corporations to give them that afternoon off. And so that's what I mean by big citizenship. Get involved with your local Boys and Girls Club, your scouting program, your YMCA program, your tutoring program, your mentoring program. Give more money to charities of your choice, but do more to share what you have gained from this country with others. And do it in a way that I want to say do it in a way that hurts, but that isn't what I mean, because it doesn't hurt. But do it in a way where you're actually giving up something of yourself. And the reason it doesn't hurt, and that's a poor choice of words, is because what you usually get back in return is very, very warm and very, very rewarding. You feel good about what you've done. It makes you a better person. That's what the era of big citizenship is all about.
No one has a perfect Army career that goes up nonstop without any plateaus or even downturns. I've had problems in my career. I've had downturns. I've had people who thought I wasn't very good and said so in writing. I've had assignments that didn't come along when I thought they should have come along. There have been several times in my career where I thought I had reached as high a level as I was going to reach and had started to make alternative plans when suddenly luck came along. Is that what you say? And things changed, and so it just kept going.
Making a recommendation to the President on the use of the military force, knowing that he will act on your advice and that people will die. Both the young men and women you send in to do it and the young men and women that they will kill on the other side. And so you constantly are searching in your mind in the hours before you provide that advice, what did I forget? What did I forget? There's something I could have done differently. There's some way to get out of this. Is there some other way to do this? Have I got the right plan? Is it all glued together? And then you give your advice, you give your recommendation, and then you spend the next several hours saying, what did I forget? What could I have done differently? Is this going to work? Am I sure I was right? You're never totally sure, but you do the best you can, and then you wait, and you wait, and you sit in that command center, as I did in the night we invaded Panama, watching as the paratroopers and Rangers jumped, sweating out icing conditions at our airfields, and our planes were having difficulty taking off. And you wait to hear the first reports of the battle, and you wait to hear what you know is going to happen. The first casualty numbers start to come in. 4 KIA, then it's 6, then it's 8, then it's 10 killed in action. Then it's 12, then it's 15, it's 20. I didn't think casualties would be high in Panama. I was expecting 22. Just a mental note. There's no analysis. That's what I thought. It came out about 24. Same thing with Desert Storm. You just sit and wait for the first report that someone's been shot down. Somebody will get shot down. Does he make it? Did he get his ejection seat activated? Or terrible moments when one of our C-130 airplanes that slow-flying, low-flying, 4-engine prop plane that has guns in it. It's a gunship, and it literally flies at a slight bank and shoots down on the enemy. It's a very vulnerable airplane, but it's pretty good when it's used correctly. And the best way to use it is at night, because it's very vulnerable in the day. And you form a pattern after a while the enemy can watch. And so one morning I got a report that it had stayed on station after dawn and got caught. And we shot down. When you have one of those shot down, it isn't a single pilot, it's like 20. So wham, 20 guys are gone. I think it was 20-something in that one, but something like that. That's about the number. And that just kicks you. And then you say, what were they doing up there after dawn? And then you start to go through the recriminations. We know better. Or the Iraqis get a lucky strike with a Scud. And of all the places a Scud could hit, the middle of the Saudi desert, an empty parking lot. Maybe it hits a single Jeep and kills one person. But suddenly a Scud comes in, very inaccurate weapon. The Patriots don't throw it off course or knock it down. And where does it hit? It hits right in a barracks complex. New troops just arrived, all jammed up in a single place. And you lose several dozen all at once. And there's nothing you could have done about it. That's hard. And you know those things are going to happen. Or you get a call one morning that we bombed a complex overnight, an Iraqi bunker. We thought was a command and control bunker. Turned out it was a command and control bunker. It was a military installation, but what we didn't know was they packed it with civilians. Maybe the civilians went there for protection, but it was the worst place to go for protection. We weren't bombing their neighborhoods, we were bombing their bunkers. But that's where 300 civilians were. So there you are faced with, you terrible people, you've killed several hundred innocent civilians. And you have to work your way through that and not get thrown off your game plan. You have to make adjustments. But it's those kinds of life and death problems that come along that are the most difficult to deal with, and the ones that you think about the most, but you can't linger on them because there's a new life and death problem the next moment. Accomplishing a mission in the way that you had hoped to accomplish it, and it satisfies the objectives that the President had established, and it went well. There's both the exhilaration of success and victory, but also there's, for a professional soldier, there's a sense of satisfaction that all of your 30-odd years of training have brought you to this point. It's not like a CEO that suddenly is thrown into a company and is told, fix it. For us, it is an accumulation of 30-odd years of experience before. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff or General Schwarzkopf's job is not an entry-level position. You have 33 years of experience, and you're supposed to know what you're doing. And when it goes well, when it works right, then you have a validation of what you've done for your whole professional life. It is it is a Super Bowl. I hate to give it a sports analogy, but to some extent, it's the Nobel Prize, the Pulitzer Prize. It's the top of it's a capstone of your professional life. And so there's a great deal of satisfaction when you do it well, but never without feelings for those who were lost. You've heard the old expression, it's a good thing war is so terrible, we might enjoy it too much. And that's very true. The other day I was giving a speech in Phoenix, and just before the speech there was a reception, and people were patting me on the back. Oh, gee, you're terrific, you're this, you're that, Desert Storm was great, and thank you very much. And a woman came up and identified herself and said that she had lost her brother in Desert Storm. And so we talked about that, and she just kept looking in my eyes, and I kept saying, he served proudly. I knew the unit he was in, although I didn't know him. And I'm sorry he was lost. I wish we didn't lose anybody, but that's what war's about. And she understood, and she started crying, and I started tearing up. We hugged a bit. And so, if I could bring any one of those soldiers back, I would. I can't. And so wars are to be avoided. When they have to be fought, fight them well and get them over with quickly. And in all of the exhilaration and joy that comes from victory and success, don't ever forget the price that was paid for it.
Proud that I believe I have the respect of my fellow soldiers. And by soldiers, I mean all of the members of the armed forces that I serve with. No medal, no nice introduction, no awards could substitute just for the knowledge I have that I believe I'm reasonably well respected by my fellow soldiers. If I didn't have that, I would have considered this to be a busted career. Once we really started the second phase of the buildup, I never had any doubt about the outcome. It was clear that we would be successful, and be successful more rapidly and with fewer casualties than all of the so-called experts on television and in the press were saying. My two concerns were I didn't know how rapidly we could bring it to a conclusion, and I wasn't sure what the casualty level would be, because I didn't know whether they would use chemicals or whether we would have some bad luck someplace along the line. So my two greatest concerns were the length of the war and the number of casualties. I'm very happy that the war ended quickly and the casualty level was much lower than even I thought, and I had about the lowest estimate of everybody, and of course much lower than all of the experts who like to appear on television with great regularity. One of the great joys for me now is to go to a public place and run into a parent, and the parent will stop me and say hello, and they'll invariably say, if it's appropriate, my son was in Desert Storm. And then I always have to pause for a moment and I usually say, is he all right? And the answer almost always is, thankfully, yes, he's all right. Thank you for bringing him home safely. We did something unique last year. In addition to doing well in Desert Storm, we have to remember we did win, notwithstanding all the second guessing. The Iraqi Army is not in Kuwait, although I'm sure some book will come out claiming it is still in Kuwait, but it isn't. So it was so successful that gave us the opportunity to reach back and get our Vietnam buddies and bring them into it. And in the parades and in all the celebrations last year, we made a particular point to include our Vietnam buddies, because most of the leaders of Desert Shield and Storm are Vietnam veterans. I mean, we're all Vietnam veterans, and so that was a great joy. I'm very happy that conflict ended quickly and with very few casualties. But for those parents who did lose children, the casualty level was too high. One of the great strengths of America, and the reason we are held in such high regard throughout the world, is that people trust our power, and they trust the way in which we will use our power. The more powerful you are, the more people want to trust you with that power. They would hate to not trust you with that power.
It was pretty exciting moment, pretty challenging moment. I had made it clear that I wasn't interested in the political career or political life, but I wanted to be active in the discussion and debate of issues in the country. And people came to me asking me my opinion on various issues, and I identified myself as a Republican. But a Republican who was very conservative fiscally and with matters of foreign policy and national defense, but who was quite moderate to liberal on a number of the social issues of the day. And so I was going into a convention where I was received as a popular former general, but I was also going into a convention that collectively was far more conservative politically than I was. And so what I had to do was to create a speech and deliver a speech that talked to the aspirations of all Americans, that told people why I was a Republican, but also told them what I felt about and what my strong views were on some of these social issues that I have differences of opinion on with respect to the party platform. And so it was a speech that took me a lot of time to craft and put together. And I've never stood before a political convention in my life, and never stood before an audience like that before. And following a very emotional set of remarks by Mrs. Reagan and a tribute to President Reagan to sort of close that first evening with everybody sort of focusing on that closing speech. And so there were a lot of things rolling around in there that I had to put together. And just once I had it together and had it set in my own mind, I just went out there and delivered it. And it went pretty well.